The Renaissance period, 1500 to 1600. Part-05. Other major figures. There were many other playwrights who were part of the golden age of English drama, and many of their plays are still successfully performed. Thomas Kyd wrote The Spanish Tragedy in 1592. And if he had written no more, he would be remembered for this play. It was one of the most popular plays of its time, and gave rise to a whole series of revenge tragedies, the greatest of which was Shakespeare's Hamlet. Tragedy of Blood. The Tragedy of Blood, influenced particularly by the Latin writer of poetic tragedies, Seneca, took many forms during Elizabeth's reign. They were called tragedies of blood, because they usually ended in the violent death of most of the main characters. The first was Gorboduc by Thomas Sackville and Thomas Norton in 1561, and the greatest Hamlet in 1600. The form remained popular for many years, reaching its final expression in the tragedy of sexual love between brother and sister, 'Tis Pity She's a Whore by John Ford, which was published in 1633, during the reign of James I's son, King Charles I. The reason for the popularity of these plays is that they were full of action and violence, passion, emotion, and often madness. Revenge was such a major theme because it was part of the code of honor of the age, and was particularly important where the family was involved. Jacobean period. The plays of the Jacobean period become even more complex, even more passionate and violent than the plays of the Elizabethan age, as they go more deeply into problems of corruption and human weakness. The masterpieces of Jacobean tragedy include the plays of John Webster, especially The White Devil, published in 1612. The Duchess of Malfi, written about the same time. These plays contain two of the most memorable tragic heroines in English drama. Thomas Middleton. The plays of Thomas Middleton include both comedy and tragedy. His comedies are of a new kind which are called city comedies. They are set in London, and are filled with local characters, tradesmen and families, all mixed into very funny social comedy. Middleton's tragedies are, like Webster's, dark, violent, and complex. They explore themes of madness, politics, and revenge. Elizabethan poetry. Poetry in the Renaissance period took a new trend. It was the poetry of the new age of discovery, enthusiasm, and excitement. Under the impact of the Renaissance, the people of England were infused with freshness and vigor, and these qualities are clearly reflected in poetry of that age. Toddle's Miscellany. The poetry of the Elizabethan age opens with publications of a volume known as Toddle's Miscellany, 1557. This book, which contained the verse of Sir Thomas Wyatt, 1503-1542, and the Earl of Surrey, 1517-1547, marks the first English poetry of the Renaissance. Wyatt and Surrey wrote a number of songs, especially sonnets which adhered to the Petrarchan model, and which was later adopted by Shakespeare. Rhyme scheme. The rhyme scheme of most sonnets in English, including Shakespeare's, is generally abubktefing. This is called the Elizabethan scheme, and is different from the original Petrarchan scheme. In the sonnet by Shakespeare below, the Elizabethan scheme is used. The first rhyme word is A, the second B, the third C, and so on. The words rhyme every other line, except in the final lines, called a couplet, where the rhyme words G are repeated together. Thomas Sackville, 1536-1608. Another original writer belonging to the early Elizabethan group of poets who were mostly courtiers. In his Mirror for Magistrates, he has given a powerful picture of the underworld, where the poet describes his meetings with some famous Englishmen who had been the victims of misfortunes. Sir Philip Sidney, 1554-1586. The greatest of these early Elizabethan poets. He was a many-sided person and a versatile genius soldier. courtier and poet, and distinguished himself in all these capacities. Like Dr. Johnson and Byron, he stood in symbolic relation to his times. He may be called the ideal Elizabethan, representing in himself the great qualities of that great age in English history and literature. Queen Elizabeth called him one of the jewels of her crown. And at the age of 23, he was considered one of the ripest statesmen of the age. As a literary figure, Sidney made his mark in prose as well as in poetry. His prose works are Arcadia and the Apology for Poetry, 1595. With Arcadia begins a new kind of imaginative writing. Though written in prose, it is strewn with love songs and sonnets. Greatest work. The Apology for Poetry is first of the series of rare and very useful commentaries, which some English poets have written about their art. His greatest work, of course, is in poetry the sequence of sonnets entitled Astrophel and Stella. As an example of lyrical poetry, expressing directly in the most sincere manner an intimate and personal experience of love in its deepest passion, this sonnet sequence marks an epoch. Spenser, 1552–1599. The greatest name in non-dramatic Elizabethan poetry is that of Spenser, who may be called the poet of chivalry and medieval allegory. As Spenser was in sympathy with Catholic ritual and Protestant reformer, he tried to reconcile these divergent elements in his greatest poetic work, The Faerie Queene, written in the form of an allegory, though on the surface it appears to be dealing with the petty intrigues, corrupt dealings and clever manipulations of politicians in the court of Elizabeth. Other poems. He also wrote some other poems of great merit. His Shepherd's Calendar, 1579, is a pastoral poem, written in an artificial classical style, which had become popular in Europe on account of the revival of learning. Here the poet gives expression to his unfruitful love for a certain unknown Rosalind, through the mouth of shepherds talking and singing. The same type of conventional pastoral imagery was used by Spenser in Astrophel, 1586, an elegy which he wrote on the death of Sidney, to whom he had dedicated the calendar. His Amoretti, consisting of 88 sonnets, written in the Petrarchan manner, which had become very popular in those days under the influence of Italian literature, describes beautifully the progress of his love for Elizabeth Boyle, whom he married in 1594. His Epithalamion is the most beautiful marriage hymn in the English language. Artistic excellence. The greatness of Spenser as a poet rests on his artistic excellence. Though his poetry is surcharged with noble ideas and lofty ideals, he occupies an honored place in the front rank of English poets as the poet of beauty, music and harmony, through which he brought about a reconciliation between the medieval and the modern world. There is no harsh note in all his poetry. He composed his poems in the spirit of a great painter, a great musician. Above all, he was the poet of imagination, who, by means of his art, gave an enduring life to the offspring of his imagination. The poet's poet. As a metrist, his greatest contribution to English poetry is the Spenserian stanza, which is admirably suited to descriptive or reflective poetry. It is used by Thomson in The Castle of Indolence, by Keats in The Eve of St. Agnes, by Shelley in The Revolt of Islam, and by Byron in Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. On account of all these factors, Spenser has been a potent influence on the English poets of all ages. And there is no exaggeration in the remark made by Charles Lamb that Spenser is the poet's poet.